say something else? Oh, okay. And that's how we got to that level.
Because it seems that, you know, setting it in some counties or communities at 10 maybe would make good sense, but I don't see how setting it at 10 in Mendocino County, it's going to have much impact in terms of creating affordable units. I mean, when it starts at 10 units, as you said, there's very little development in Mendocino County that are 10 or more. I mean, how many permits and how many houses have been built in this last year that are 10 or more units? Do you know?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's one of the concerns I have is if we were to set it at 5, I think that seems to make a little more sense, and then it's in sync with how we define a major subdivision. So that's one comment I have is I just think that that's more logical and it makes more sense, and it might actually create some affordable units, whereas this, there's a lot of detail here, there's a lot of substance. I think obviously you've spent quite a bit of time on it, but I just don't see setting it at 10 that we're going to get very far down that path of a very, very important issue that I think the county has neglected for a very long time. So setting it at 10, I just don't see where we're going to go. You know, there may be a few major developments that occur in the future, but you know, in the next year there may not be any. I don't know. So it would be good to have that data to know how many units have actually been constructed in, let's say, the last 2 years that this document would be applicable to, and then that would give us an indicator of how much credit or how many actual units would have been constructed that would fit this definition of low, from moderate to the extremely low. Those, I think there's 4 income categories there, but starting it at 10, I just don't see that we're going to get very far. I'm understanding that you wanted to have consensus or agreement from a wide variety of stakeholders, but I just don't see that it takes us very far down the path of actually taking action on this very important issue. So, you know, I bet that I could look, because I'm recalling some of the documents we looked at 2 years ago, where some areas actually do it on all units, and some do it, I think, more to the 5 level. So if we were to set it at 5, I think it would make a lot more sense. And so I really would like that information and say, the last 2 years, if this policy had been in place, how many units would actually have been created in the county? I think that's good information, because if we're setting policy, that's going to give us retrospectively information on what this policy would have done in the last 2 years. So I would like that information. Thank you.
And if I could speak to some of that, this was one of those areas that got discussed extensively, and it is a balancing act, because anything you do in this particular arena, while it may provide some funds for inclusionary housing, it also adds to the cost of creating housing in the first place. And so you're kind of balancing, are you in fact getting to a point where no housing would be produced, because to do so there are so many fees or costs attached to it that not only do you not end up with affordable housing, you don't end up with, I don't know what, non-affordable housing? You know, whatever the range of housing is. And so, market rate, okay, thank you. Market rate housing. So, you know, that's part of the discussion that occurs. One of the thoughts we had was you implement, you do an annual review of what happens, and at some point, if the board says, okay, this is interesting, it is not getting us where we need to be going, that at that point there's some experience to be able to say, you know, this isn't addressing the need and we need to take the next steps. So it doesn't mean if this gets passed that it cannot be modified in the future based on experience. As far as what's happened over the last couple of years, I believe in discussions, but we will confirm it, that we have not had, I believe there may be a couple of developments kind of on paper regarding building, but we haven't had any that I think have actually been built that this would apply to. And so, you know, as I said, it's a balancing act between wanting to reasonably increase just the housing stock overall in this county, because that's an issue, as well as trying to get more affordable housing. And the 10 units seem to be one that people agreed on, but you're right. I think it needs to be reviewed, and our hope would be that that could be reviewed in the future after, you know, a couple of years of implementation and seeing what the results were.
Well, that's why I want that historical information. So it gives us an indicator if this policy, based on past activity, historical information, what would this policy have done?
And
so I think that that's a valid request to look at where we would have been.
And we will bring it back
for the
with
last
us.
2 years, let's say. But I also remember, Ms. Glassy, that we had a presentation by, I think, an outside entity that was working with the executive office, the housing task force, that spent, I don't know, 2-3 years of meetings to go over this, and they refuted a lot of those comments with respect to inclusionary ordinances limiting or decreasing the amount of units constructed. I attended a conference on the housing task force concept in the state of California, and they also had speakers that completely refuted that as an argument, that it's integrated into the cost of doing business. It doesn't necessarily come up with that outcome. So I think that people talk about that, but I remember specifically the presentation we had here in board chambers. I don't remember the individual that presented that information, but it's part of the record, and we had an extensive discussion. And that was completely refuted as a deterrent to building, that inclusionary ordinances are not that, and they